Three men stared into the void and saw different things. One saw meaninglessness as the ultimate liberation. Another saw suffering as the fundamental truth of existence. The third saw nothingness as the ground from which all meaning must be built. Together they mapped the darkest territory of human thought, where all certainties dissolve and we must face the terrifying question: what if nothing matters? Nihilism is not just a philosophy, it's a psychological crisis, a cultural disease, and perhaps the defining challenge of modern existence. It whispers that your achievements mean nothing, that your relationships will end, that every value you hold is arbitrary, that the universe doesn't care whether you exist or not. It's the voice that asks, why bother? But nihilism is also something stranger and more complex than simple despair. For the three thinkers we'll explore today, confronting nothingness wasn't surrender. It was the beginning of something new. They understood that before you can build authentic meaning, you must first demolish the false meaning society has given you. Before you can become who you are, you must face the terrifying truth that you could be nothing at all. This is the story of three philosophers who walked into darkness and returned with maps. Their journeys took different paths. Their conclusions contradicted each other, but each one understood something essential about what it means to exist in a universe that offers no guarantees, no cosmic purpose, no built-in meaning. Today, we'll follow their paths through three acts. The diagnosis, where we'll understand how nihilism emerged from the collapse of traditional certainties. The descent, where we'll follow each thinker into the heart of meaninglessness itself. And the response, where we'll discover what they found on the other side of nothing. The death of God. April 1882. Friedrich Nietzsche sat in a cafe in Genoa, watching crowds move through the streets, going about their daily business with the easy confidence of people who believe they know what things mean. They attended church on Sunday. They valued honesty, compassion, humility. They believed in progress, in justice, in the dignity of human life. They thought these values were self-evident truths, eternal principles built into the fabric of reality itself. Nietzsche saw something they didn't. These people were living in a world that had already died. They were following moral rules that no longer had any foundation. They were believers in a God they had killed without realizing it. The phrase "God is dead" would become Nietzsche's most famous statement, but also his most misunderstood. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't gleefully announcing the triumph of atheism. He was diagnosing a catastrophe, the greatest catastrophe in human history, and warning that almost no one understood what had happened or what it would cost. For thousands of years, Western civilization had organized itself around a single assumption: the universe has intrinsic meaning because God created it with purpose. Moral values aren't human inventions, they're divine commands. Human life has dignity because we're made in God's image. Suffering has meaning because it's part of a cosmic plan. Death is not the end, because immortal souls continue in another realm. This worldview wasn't just religious doctrine. It was the foundation of everything: law, morality, art, politics, family structure, individual identity. Remove the foundation and the entire structure collapses. And the foundation was crumbling. The Enlightenment had begun the process. Science explained natural phenomena without reference to divine intention. Historical criticism revealed the Bible as a human document full of contradictions and cultural influences. Philosophy demonstrated that knowledge comes from human reason, not divine revelation. Democracy replaced the idea of kings ruling by divine right, with governments deriving authority from human consent. Each step seemed like progress. Each advance of knowledge felt like liberation from superstition. But few people trace the logical implications all the way through. If God doesn't exist, then moral values are human creations, arbitrary preferences with no more cosmic authority than tastes in food. If humans aren't divinely created souls but evolved animals, then human life has no special status, no inherent dignity beyond what we choose to grant it. If death is final extinction, then nothing we do has permanent significance. Nietzsche saw this with perfect clarity. He understood that European culture was running on borrowed time, still following Christian morality while abandoning the metaphysical beliefs that justified it. People continued to value compassion, equality, and justice, not realizing these were Christian values that made no sense in a godless universe. Why should evolved primates care about the suffering of strangers? Why should the strong sacrifice for the weak? Natural selection favors strength, cunning, and ruthless self-interest, not humility and self-sacrifice. The masses didn't see the problem because they weren't thinking clearly. They had discarded God but kept his moral system, like tenants who murder the landlord but continue paying rent out of habit. This couldn't last. Eventually, people would realize that with no God, there's no cosmic lawgiver, which means no objective right and wrong, which means morality is just collective opinion, which means nothing is actually forbidden. This realization would come. When it did, Nietzsche predicted two possible responses. Most people would fall into passive nihilism, a listless despair where nothing seems worth doing because nothing ultimately matters. Life becomes a burden to be endured until death finally ends the pointless suffering. But a few, the strong ones, would embrace active nihilism, using the collapse of old values as an opportunity to create new ones. If nothing has intrinsic meaning, then we're free to create meaning ourselves. If no cosmic authority dictates how we should live, then we can become the authors of our own values. Nietzsche called these future individuals the Übermensch, the Overman, those who would overcome the human need for external validation and cosmic purpose. They would face the void without flinching, would create meaning through their own will and action, would become artists of their own lives. But first, there would be chaos. First, the old world would have to finish dying. First, people would have to face what they had done, understand that in killing God they had erased the boundary between good and evil, had dissolved the foundation of every value they held dear. Sitting in that cafe, watching people move through their ordinary lives, Nietzsche felt the weight of what was coming. These people thought they lived in a stable world. They had no idea they were standing on ground that was already collapsing beneath them. Within a few generations, everything they believed would be revealed as nothing more than useful fictions, comforting lies we told ourselves to avoid confronting the void. The will to live and its futility. 60 years earlier, in 1818, Arthur Schopenhauer published a book that almost no one read. The World as Will and Representation would eventually be recognized as one of the most important works in Western philosophy. But when it first appeared, the world ignored it completely. The few copies that sold gathered dust on forgotten shelves. Schopenhauer's publisher went bankrupt. This rejection devastated him. He had poured years of work into a philosophical system he believed explained the fundamental nature of reality. He expected fame, recognition, students flocking to hear him lecture. Instead, he got silence. The irony was perfect. Schopenhauer had written a philosophy arguing that desire leads inevitably to suffering, that satisfaction is impossible, that existence itself is a trap. And his first major experience after publishing this theory was the suffering caused by his own thwarted desire for recognition. But Schopenhauer's philosophy wasn't born from that one disappointment. It emerged from a lifetime of observing the world with brutal honesty, refusing to accept comforting illusions, following logical implications wherever they led, no matter how dark the conclusions. His central insight was this: beneath the surface appearance of the world, beneath all the individual objects and events we perceive, lies a single underlying reality he called the will. Not will as in conscious choice or rational decision, but will as blind, unconscious, insatiable striving. The will is the force that drives everything. The seed pushing up through soil toward sunlight, the predator hunting prey, the heart beating in your chest, the sexual urge, the hunger for food, the desperate need to continue existing. The will doesn't think, it doesn't plan, it doesn't care, it just pushes forward endlessly, relentlessly, without purpose or direction. It's pure striving, desire without object, hunger that can never be satisfied, and we are manifestations of this will. We think we're rational individuals making free choices, pursuing goals we've deliberately selected. But this is illusion. The will uses us. Our conscious thoughts are rationalizations, stories we tell ourselves to explain actions the will has already determined. We think we freely choose to eat when hungry, reproduce when aroused, defend ourselves when threatened. But these aren't choices. They're the will operating through us, using our bodies as instruments for its own pointless continuation. This leads to a devastating conclusion. Suffering is not accidental, but essential to existence. Desire means lack, which means pain. When we desire something, we suffer from not having it. When we obtain it, satisfaction lasts briefly before new desires arise. Satisfaction is always temporary. Suffering is permanent. Look at your own life honestly, Schopenhauer demanded. How much of it is spent in genuine contentment versus in states of wanting, striving, feeling incomplete? We're either suffering from unsatisfied desires or bored because we have nothing urgent to desire. Happiness is just the brief interval between one pain ending and another beginning. Even worse, our suffering serves no purpose. We're not working toward some grand goal. We're not evolving toward perfection. We're not accumulating spiritual merit that will be rewarded in another life. We're just manifestations of blind will, temporarily existing, struggling pointlessly, then dying so new manifestations can repeat the same futile cycle. Schopenhauer looked at nature and saw not the harmony of God's creation, but a war of all against all. Every animal must consume other life to survive. Predators tear prey apart. Parasites devour hosts from within. Plants compete for sunlight and nutrients, strangling competitors, poisoning soil. Life feeds on life in an endless cycle of suffering, death, and temporary continuation. Human existence is worse because we're conscious enough to reflect on our condition. Animals suffer, but don't know they suffer meaninglessly. Humans understand. We can step back from immediate experience and ask, what's the point? And when we ask honestly, the answer is, there is no point. We exist because the will blindly perpetuates itself. That's all. Schopenhauer's philosophy is often called pessimism, but he would reject that label. Pessimism implies things could be better, but unfortunately aren't. Schopenhauer argued things are exactly as bad as they could possibly be. This is the worst of all possible worlds because any worse would be impossible. It would collapse under its own suffering and cease to exist. His analysis extended to human relationships, culture, and society. Love is not romantic union of souls, but the will's trick to make us reproduce, ensuring its continuation through new suffering beings. Friendship is temporary alliance based on mutual benefit. Society is barely contained war, individuals pursuing self-interest, while following rules only from fear of punishment. Even art and intellectual achievement offer only temporary respite. When absorbed in aesthetic contemplation or philosophical thought, we briefly escape the will's demands. We stop wanting, stop striving, exist in pure observation. This is why art matters, why philosophy matters, not because they reveal truth or improve life, but because they provide brief vacations from the suffering that is existence. But these escapes are temporary. Eventually, biological needs return. Hunger, fatigue, sexual desire reassert themselves. The will reclaims us, drags us back into the cycle of wanting and suffering. Schopenhauer saw only one permanent solution, the denial of the will to live. Not suicide, which he rejected as merely destroying one manifestation while the will continues through others. True escape requires something deeper, a complete turning away from desire itself, a total renunciation of the will's demands. He found this possibility in Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism and Hindu asceticism. These traditions understood what Western philosophy had missed. Existence is suffering. Suffering comes from desire. Eliminating desire eliminates suffering. The goal is not heaven or salvation, but cessation, the complete extinction of individual will in recognition that the separate self is illusion. This is nirvana, not a place but a state, the complete absence of wanting. When you no longer desire anything, no longer fear anything, no longer cling to existence, you're free. Not free to do what you want, but free from wanting itself. Most people aren't capable of this. Most will spend their lives trapped in the cycle, pursuing satisfactions that never satisfy, suffering pointlessly until death temporarily ends their particular manifestation of will. Only a few, through meditation, renunciation, and complete detachment, might escape. When Schopenhauer's work finally found an audience decades later, readers were horrified and fascinated. Here was a philosopher who looked at existence without illusion, who followed logic to its darkest conclusions, who offered no comfort, no hope, no promise that things get better. Many dismissed him as depressed, pathological, unable to see beauty and joy in life, but Schopenhauer would respond, "I see reality. You see what you wish were true. The question is not whether my philosophy makes you feel good, but whether it's correct." The question of being. September 1927. Martin Heidegger stood before his students at the University of Marburg and posed a question so simple it seemed stupid. What is being? Not what exists, not what particular things are, but what does it mean for anything to exist at all? What is the meaning of being itself? The students stared. What kind of question was this? Things exist or they don't. What's to explain? But Heidegger understood that this seemingly obvious question had been forgotten. Western philosophy, since Plato had cataloged different types of beings, physical objects and mental states, substances and properties, causes and effects, but it had stopped asking about being itself, the ground that makes any existence possible. We use the word is constantly. This desk is brown, that building is tall, I'm thinking, she is walking. The is seems transparent, obvious, not requiring explanation. But what are we actually saying when we say something is? What is this being that we casually ascribe to everything without understanding what we mean? Heidegger began with the entity that asks about being, the human being, or what he called Dasein, a German word meaning being there. Existence that is situated, always already thrown into a world. Dasein is the being for whom its own being is at issue, the entity that questions what it means to exist. Animals don't ask why they exist. Rocks don't wonder about their own being. Only humans face the strange predicament of existing while simultaneously questioning that existence, aware that we are but unable to fully grasp what that awareness means. This leads to a fundamental anxiety, not fear of something specific, not worry about particular problems, but a deeper unease about existence itself. Why am I here? Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does being occur at all? Most of the time we avoid this anxiety by losing ourselves in the they, das Man, the anonymous mass of public opinion and social convention. We do what one does, think what they think, value what people value. We adopt ready-made identities, student, worker, parent, citizen. We follow scripts written by culture, playing roles that seem natural but are actually inherited patterns. This is not living inauthentically in a moral sense. It's a structural feature of Dasein. We're thrown into a world already full of meanings, practices, and expectations. We can't create ourselves from nothing. We begin embedded in social reality, interpreting ourselves through concepts we didn't create. But we can also fall completely into this public world, never questioning its assumptions, never confronting the question of our own being. We become what Heidegger called Das Man, losing ourselves in busyness, distraction, idle talk, accepting conventional wisdom without examination. Then something happens. A moment of disruption. Perhaps someone close to us dies, and suddenly we confront the fact that we will die too, that all these projects and concerns that seem so important will end, that existence is temporary. Or perhaps a life crisis reveals that the identity we've constructed is false, that we've been living according to someone else's script. These moments reveal what's usually hidden. We are beings toward death. Death is not something that happens at the end of life. It's the horizon that gives life its shape, the possibility that is always present, the ultimate not yet that defines what we are. We are the beings who will die, and this fact colors everything. Confronting this produces anxiety in its purest form, not fear of dying, which is fear of a future event, but anxiety about the groundlessness of existence itself. We are beings who exist without having chosen to exist, who will cease to exist without being able to prevent it, who are responsible for giving meaning to an existence that has no guaranteed meaning. Most people flee this anxiety. They lose themselves in busyness, accumulate possessions, pursue success, anything to avoid the confrontation with their own finitude and the question it poses. If I will die, if everything ends, what makes any of this matter? Heidegger saw this flight as understandable but inauthentic. Authentic existence requires facing the anxiety, acknowledging our freedom and our finitude, taking responsibility for creating meaning in a world that doesn't provide it automatically. This doesn't mean inventing arbitrary values from nothing. We're already embedded in a world of inherited practices and shared meanings, but we can take up these meanings authentically, making them our own through conscious choice rather than mindless conformity. We can live toward death, letting awareness of finitude clarify what matters, stripping away the trivial concerns that usually occupy us. Heidegger's analysis revealed something disturbing. Nihilism isn't just a philosophical position some people adopt. It's built into modern existence. When traditional authorities collapse, when religious worldviews lose their grip, when we're left with technical rationality and market values, meaninglessness becomes the default condition. Modern life is characterized by what Heidegger called Gestell, in framing, a way of encountering reality that sees everything as resource, as standing reserve waiting to be used. Nature is not sacred or beautiful, but a collection of materials to be exploited. Animals are not fellow creatures, but meat to be produced efficiently. Even humans become human resources, valued only for their utility in economic systems. This isn't anyone's fault. It's how being reveals itself in our era. We've inherited a way of thinking that reduces everything to calculable utility, that asks about everything, what is it for, rather than letting things be what they are. We've lost the capacity for wonder, for letting things reveal themselves on their own terms, rather than forcing them into categories of usefulness. The result is a profound homelessness. We live in a world of meaning we didn't create, following purposes we didn't choose, unable to find solid ground beneath the inherited structures. We're thrown into existence without instruction manual, forced to make sense of being using concepts that themselves need explanation. Heidegger's students found this analysis disturbing but liberating. Here was a philosopher who took their deepest anxieties seriously, who didn't dismiss existential dread as irrational but saw it as revealing something true about human existence. The anxiety they felt wasn't sickness but health, the natural response of a being confronting the groundlessness of its own existence. But Heidegger offered no easy solutions. He couldn't give them meaning. He could only show them where meaning has to come from their own authentic confrontation with being, from taking responsibility for existence in full awareness of its temporality and groundlessness. Schopenhauer's abyss. Schopenhauer's daily routine never varied. He woke at 7, drank coffee alone, and spent the morning writing, allowing no interruptions. Afternoon was for walking, always the same route, his poodle trotting beside him. Evening was for reading, dinner at the same restaurant where he sat at the same table, return home by 9. Sleep, repeat. He needed this rigid structure because he had looked into something that most people only glimpse in their worst moments. He had seen through the surface of existence to the horror underneath, and only obsessive routine kept him from being consumed by what he knew. The insight came early, probably in his 20s, though he never wrote about the exact moment. He was walking through a street in Dresden when something shifted in his perception. The people around him, going about their business, suddenly appeared different. Not as individuals pursuing rational goals, but as organisms driven by forces they didn't understand. Puppets animated by the will, all desperately seeking satisfactions that would never truly satisfy. He saw the young couple walking arm in arm, gazing at each other with adoring eyes, and recognized it not as love, but as the will's mechanism for reproduction. Their attraction wasn't choice or preference. It was biology using illusion to ensure its continuation. They thought they were choosing each other. They were being used. He saw the merchant hurrying to his shop, anxious about profit and loss, and recognized the futility. Even if the man succeeded, accumulated wealth, built a successful business, so what? The satisfaction would last hours at most before new worries arose. The striving never stopped. The peace never came. He saw children playing, their laughter carrying across the street, and felt a wave of sadness. They didn't know yet. They still believed life would deliver on its promises. Experience would teach them otherwise. They would learn that every satisfaction is temporary, every achievement hollow, every relationship eventually disappointing or ended by death. From that moment, Schopenhauer couldn't unsee it. Everywhere he looked, he saw beings driven by needs they couldn't satisfy, pursuing goals that wouldn't fulfill them, suffering necessarily and pointlessly. The worst part was consciousness. Animals suffer, but don't reflect on their suffering. A deer killed by wolves experiences terror and pain, but doesn't lie there thinking, why? What's the point of this? Humans do. We suffer, and we know we suffer, and we ask questions that have no good answers. Schopenhauer studied the world's religions and philosophies, searching for someone who understood. Most offered comforting lies. This suffering is temporary, it serves a purpose. It will be rewarded in another life. It's punishment for sins, it's testing your character. It will make you stronger. All nonsense, all evasions of the truth. Then he discovered Eastern philosophy, Buddhism and Hinduism, and found thinkers who had reached the same conclusions through different paths. Life is dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, suffering. This suffering comes from tanha, craving, desire. The self that suffers is maya, illusion. Reality is not the individual personalities we identify with, but something larger, more fundamental, and ultimately meaningless. The Buddhists called it emptiness. The Hindus called it Brahman. Schopenhauer called it will. Same insight, different terminology. He found confirmation everywhere. Read any honest autobiography, and you find more suffering than joy, more disappointment than satisfaction. Look at any moment in history, and you find war, disease, oppression, cruelty. Study biology, and you find that life perpetuates itself through violence. Organisms consuming each other in endless cycles. Examine your own daily experience and you find that contentment is rare and brief, while various forms of discomfort are constant and prolonged. Even the greatest human achievements revealed the futility. Beethoven created sublime music but died deaf and lonely. Socrates was executed. Jesus was crucified. Greatness doesn't exempt you from suffering. It often intensifies it because genius makes you more sensitive, more aware, more tormented by the gap between what could be and what is. Schopenhauer concluded that procreation was a crime. Every time humans bring a new life into existence, they were creating a being that will necessarily suffer. The parents might feel joy at the birth, but they're not the ones who will experience decades of unfulfilled desires, disappointments, pains, and eventual death. They've sentenced someone else to this. He never married, never had children. He lived alone with his dog, whom he called Atman, the Hindu word for soul, because he believed the dog possessed something closer to wisdom than most humans. The dog didn't ask questions, didn't hope for more than immediate satisfaction of basic needs, didn't torment itself with thoughts about meaning and purpose. Critics called Schopenhauer a misanthrope, a bitter man who projected his own unhappiness onto the world. He didn't deny being bitter. He simply insisted his bitterness was appropriate response to accurate perception. The problem wasn't his psychology, but reality itself. Yet Schopenhauer didn't kill himself. If life is only suffering, why continue? His answer was complex. Suicide doesn't solve the problem because it's an act of the will, the individual asserting its desire for non-existence, which is still desire, still affirmation of the will. True escape requires something different. The gradual weakening of will through denial of its demands. This is why he valued asceticism, meditation, artistic contemplation, anything that temporarily suspends the will's operation. When absorbed in music, you stop wanting. When meditating, you stop striving. These moments offer glimpses of what freedom might mean, not absence of existence, but absence of desire. He pursued these practices himself. Hours spent playing flute, losing himself in Bach. Hours reading philosophy, his mind occupied with pure thought rather than personal concerns. Hours sitting in complete stillness, attempting to quiet the constant chattering of will-driven thoughts. Did it work? Did he find peace? His writings suggest not. The moments of respite were brief. The will always returned, dragging him back into the world of wanting and suffering. He grew old continuing the same rigid routine, defending the same philosophy against critics who found it too dark, waiting for death to finally end what life had never fulfilled. When he died in 1860 at age 72, he died alone, as he had lived. His final words, if he spoke any, are not recorded. His legacy was a philosophy that most people found unbearable to contemplate seriously, a mirror reflecting truths we desperately want to believe are false. Nietzsche's madness. January 3, 1889. Turin, Italy. Friedrich Nietzsche left his boarding house for a morning walk. At the corner of Piazza Carlo Alberto, he saw a horse being beaten by its driver. The horse had collapsed. The driver was whipping it to make it stand, to make it continue pulling the carriage. Nietzsche rushed forward, threw his arms around the horse's neck and began sobbing. He stayed there, clinging to the animal, weeping uncontrollably. Bystanders gathered, uncertain what to do. Eventually, his landlord was summoned and led Nietzsche back to his room. He would never be lucid again. The madness that had been lurking at the edges of his consciousness finally claimed him completely. He spent the last 11 years of his life in a state of mental confusion, cared for first by his mother, then his sister. The brilliant philosopher who had mapped the crisis of meaning in Western culture became, in the end, a cautionary tale about what happens when you stare too long into the abyss. But the collapse didn't come from nowhere. Nietzsche had been descending toward it for years, pushing himself harder, thinking more dangerously, isolating himself more completely. He was trying to think thoughts that human minds were not designed to think, facing implications that most people carefully avoid. The central problem he grappled with was this: if God is dead, if traditional values have lost their foundation, what prevents complete nihilism? What stops people from concluding that nothing matters and descending into either apathy or violence? Without external authority to define good and evil, right and wrong, meaning and meaninglessness, what's left? Nietzsche saw two possible futures. The first was passive nihilism, what he called the last man. These would be people who had given up on greatness, on striving, on risk. They would live comfortable, mediocre lives, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, working at meaningless jobs, consuming entertainment, never questioning, never challenging themselves. They would be healthy, they would be safe, but they would be spiritually dead. The last man says, "We have invented happiness," and blinks. Everything dangerous has been eliminated. Everything challenging has been softened. Risk is minimized. Offense is avoided. Comfort is maximized. Everyone is equal because no one is allowed to rise above anyone else. This is the future Nietzsche feared most. Not violent chaos, but comfortable meaninglessness. Humanity choosing safety over greatness. Choosing pleasant survival over dangerous vitality. The second possibility was active nihilism. People who would use the death of God as liberation. If no cosmic authority dictates values, then we're free to create our own. If life has no inherent meaning, then we can give it meaning through our actions, our creations, our chosen projects. This was the path of the Übermensch. But becoming Übermensch required something most people couldn't do. Facing the void without flinching, accepting that you're responsible for creating your own meaning, that no one will save you, that you're radically free and radically alone. Most people would rather believe comforting lies than accept this freedom. Nietzsche tested himself constantly. He lived in voluntary poverty, moving between cheap boarding houses in Switzerland and Italy. He suffered chronic pain, probably from migraines and stomach problems, possibly from an earlier syphilis infection. He had almost no friends. His books sold poorly. He received virtually no recognition for his work during his sane life. He pushed himself because he believed philosophy had to be lived, not just thought. It wasn't enough to write about overcoming nihilism. He had to demonstrate it through his own existence, had to show that a human being could create meaning in a meaningless universe through sheer force of will and affirmation. His doctrine of eternal recurrence was the ultimate test. Imagine that every moment of your life will repeat infinitely, exactly as it occurred. Every pain, every disappointment, every moment of boredom or suffering or despair will happen again and again forever. Could you accept this? Could you affirm your life so completely that you would want it to repeat eternally without change? Most people couldn't. Most lives contain too much suffering, too much compromised time doing things we don't want to do, too much lingering in bad relationships or unfulfilling work. Most of us would change major portions of our lives if given the chance, which means we're not living in a way we can fully affirm. The Übermensch would be someone who had so completely embraced their existence that eternal recurrence would be not a curse, but a blessing. Someone who had eliminated everything they couldn't affirm, who had created a life so fully chosen that repeating it infinitely would be desirable. Nietzsche tried to live this way. He tried to make every moment something he could affirm eternally. But the strain was enormous. He was trying to create meaning through pure will in a universe that offered no support, trying to be his own foundation when the ground kept shifting beneath him. The loneliness was crushing. He wrote constantly, but had almost no one to talk to. His few relationships deteriorated. He proposed marriage to Lou Salome and was rejected. He fought with his sister. He became increasingly isolated, spending months at a time with almost no human contact beyond brief exchanges with landladies and waiters. In his final sane months, his writing became more urgent, more desperate. He knew something was breaking. He wrote Ecce Homo, his intellectual autobiography, with chapter titles like Why I Am So Wise and Why I Write Such Good Books, proclaiming his own greatness because no one else would. It reads like a man shouting into the void, insisting on his importance while knowing the void doesn't care. Then the collapse, the embrace of the tortured horse, the subsequent letters he sent signing them Dionysus or the Crucified, fragmentary statements mixing grandiosity and confusion. His mind, pushed beyond its limits, finally broke. Was the madness caused by his philosophy? Did thinking too deeply about the abyss finally destroy him? Or was it simply syphilis and physical illness that would have destroyed him regardless of what he thought? The question haunted later philosophers. Heidegger and others debated whether Nietzsche's madness invalidated his philosophy or confirmed it, whether he was a martyr to truth or a cautionary example of reason's limits. What's certain is this: Nietzsche took the crisis of modern meaning more seriously than almost anyone else. He didn't retreat into comfortable beliefs. He didn't pretend traditional values still worked. He looked directly at the implications of living in a godless universe and tried to find a way through that wasn't either despair or delusion. The attempt may have destroyed him, but it also produced some of the most penetrating analysis of modern existence ever written. Insights that remain relevant because the crisis he diagnosed has only deepened. We're still living in the world where God is dead, still figuring out how to create meaning without external authority, still split between passive nihilism and active creation. Heidegger's turning. 1933. Martin Heidegger stood before assembled students and faculty at the University of Freiburg and accepted the position of rector. He gave a speech titled The Self-Assertion of the German University that shocked many who heard it. The philosopher who had written so carefully about authenticity, about resisting the anonymous they, about facing existence without comforting illusions, now spoke in the language of nationalism and collective destiny. This was Heidegger's great shame, the decision that would haunt his reputation forever. He joined the Nazi Party. For approximately 1 year, he believed Hitler's movement offered a path beyond nihilism, a way to reassert authentic values against the emptiness of modern existence. He was spectacularly wrong. Within months, he began to realize his mistake. Within a year, he resigned as rector and withdrew from party activities. He would never adequately explain or apologize for this period, would never confront it honestly in his later writings. It remained a darkness at the center of his life, a demonstration that even the deepest thinking about authenticity doesn't protect against catastrophic moral failure. But this failure itself revealed something important about the problem of nihilism. When traditional values collapse, when people experience the groundlessness of modern existence, they become desperate for something solid, something absolute, something that promises meaning and purpose. Fascism exploited this desperation, offering certainty, collective identity, and a sense of historical mission to people who felt lost in modernity's emptiness. Heidegger's temporary embrace of Nazism showed that intellectually recognizing the problem of nihilism doesn't automatically provide the solution. understanding that existence is groundless, that we must create our own meaning, that authenticity requires confronting anxiety. Knowing all this doesn't tell you what meaning to create or how to live authentically. The analysis leaves the crucial question unanswered. After withdrawing from politics, Heidegger's thinking underwent what he called the turning, dia cara, a fundamental shift in approach. His early work had focused on individual Dasein, on how individual humans encounter the question of being. His later work turned toward being itself, toward the larger historical destiny that shapes how being reveals itself in different eras. He argued that Western history could be understood as the history of being's self-revelation, different epochs characterized by different fundamental ways of understanding what it means for something to exist. Ancient Greeks experienced being as presencing, things emerging into unconcealedness. Medieval Christianity experienced being as created by divine will. Modernity experiences being as standing reserve, everything reduced to calculable resource. This progression wasn't progress, it was progressive forgetting, each stage moving further from the original Greek experience of wonder at the sheer fact that beings are, that there is something rather than nothing. By the modern era, this wonder had been completely lost, replaced by technical rationality that sees everything only as material for human manipulation. Nihilism, in this analysis, is not primarily an individual psychological state, but a cultural and historical condition. It's what happens when being withdraws, when the connection to the fundamental mystery of existence is severed, when we're left with nothing but useful objects and technical processes. Heidegger saw this most clearly in technology. Not individual machines, but technology with a capital T, the entire framework of modern thinking that approaches reality as something to be controlled, predicted, and exploited. This framework is so deeply embedded that we can't think our way out of it through individual effort. It shapes what counts as knowledge, what counts as truth, what counts as worthwhile activity. The result is a profound homelessness. We live in a world where everything has been rendered comprehensible, calculable, and manipulable. Yet this very mastery has robbed existence of depth and mystery. We know more and more about how things work while understanding less and less what anything means. Can this be overcome? Heidegger became increasingly pessimistic. In a famous interview late in life, he said, "Only a God can save us now. Human effort alone couldn't restore authentic dwelling, couldn't reconnect us to being's mystery. We had to wait for being itself to send a new revelation, a new way of understanding existence that would rescue us from technology's totalizing grip." This was a dark conclusion from a philosopher who had spent his career insisting on human responsibility for creating meaning. It suggested that the crisis of nihilism might be unsolvable through human action, that we might be trapped in meaninglessness until something beyond our control shifts the fundamental structure of our relationship to being. Yet Heidegger continued writing, continued teaching, continued the work of thinking. If he truly believed only a God could save us, why bother? Perhaps because thinking itself, the careful attention to how being reveals and conceals itself, was the only authentic response available, not because it would solve the problem, but because it was the appropriate stance for beings who can question being, even when being offers no answers. Creating values from nothing. Nietzsche's final challenge echoes across the decades. If all values are human creations, if nothing is inherently meaningful, how do we avoid falling into complete relativism where any value is as good as any other? How do we create values that genuinely bind us, that feel compelling rather than arbitrary? His answer, never fully developed before madness claimed him, pointed toward a radical form of self-creation. Values emerge not from reasoning or from imitating others, but from the depths of what he called life itself, the creative force that seeks to grow, expand, and overcome obstacles. The Übermensch would be someone who had developed such intense self-mastery that their values flowed directly from their authentic nature, rather than from social conditioning or inherited traditions. This is not selfishness in the ordinary sense. It's becoming so completely yourself that your actions express your nature the way a tree's growth expresses its form, necessarily, beautifully, without internal contradiction. Nietzsche called this amor fati, love of fate, a complete acceptance of your existence, including all its suffering and challenges. Not resignation or passive endurance, but active affirmation, saying yes to life so completely that you would choose to live it again exactly as it was. This requires what he called self-overcoming, constantly pushing beyond your current limits, refusing to settle into comfortable patterns, treating yourself as raw material to be shaped into something greater. The Übermensch is always becoming, never finished, always surpassing previous versions of themselves. But here's the paradox. Nietzsche provides no recipe for how to do this. He can't tell you what values to create, because authentic values must emerge from your particular nature, not from following someone else's prescription. He can only point to the necessity and insist you must find your own path. This is why Nietzsche's philosophy is both liberating and terrifying. Liberation because it insists you're free to become anything. Terror because it provides no guidance about what to become, no assurance that you'll succeed, no guarantee that your self-created meaning will feel satisfying rather than hollow. Critics argue this leads directly to problems Nietzsche couldn't solve. Without external standards, how do we judge between different value systems? If everyone creates their own values, what happens when my values conflict with yours? Doesn't this justify the strong dominating the weak, since there's no objective morality to constrain them? Nietzsche would respond that these worries reflect slave morality, the resentful mentality of those too weak to create their own values, who want universal rules to protect them from the strong. Master morality doesn't need such protections because it comes from abundance, from overflowing vitality that creates rather than restricts. But this response doesn't solve the practical problem. In a world where everyone claims the right to create their own values, conflict is inevitable. Without shared standards, that conflict has no resolution except power. Whichever values can enforce themselves through strength prevail. This is perhaps why Nietzsche's philosophy has been both inspiring and dangerous, used by individualists seeking authentic existence and by totalitarians justifying domination. The ideas resist easy application, constantly threatening to collapse into either solipsistic individualism or brutal social Darwinism. Yet the core insight remains valuable. In a world without inherent meaning, we must create meaning, and that creation is terrifying and sublime, the highest expression of human freedom and human responsibility combined. Compassion and denial. Schopenhauer's solution to meaninglessness moved in the opposite direction from Nietzsche's. Rather than affirming life more intensely, he advocated gradually denying the will that drives existence, weakening the grip of desire until you achieve something approaching peace. The path begins with recognizing that the self is illusion. What you experience as I, the distinct personality you identify with, is just one temporary manifestation of the universal will. Beneath the surface differences that seem to separate you from others, there's only one reality. Blind, unconscious, endlessly striving, will expressing itself through countless forms. This recognition leads to compassion. If the boundary between self and other is ultimately illusory, then causing suffering to others is causing suffering to yourself. Different manifestations of the same underlying reality harming themselves. All cruelty, all exploitation, all indifference to suffering emerges from the fundamental mistake of thinking we're truly separate. Compassion isn't moral duty imposed from outside. It's recognition of metaphysical truth. We are one. The suffering being you encounter isn't really other. It's you experiencing itself through another form. This sounds beautiful, but Schopenhauer's conclusion was darker. Compassion alone doesn't end suffering. It only distributes it more evenly. True escape requires something more radical, complete denial of the will to live itself. This means not just avoiding harm, but actively withdrawing from all forms of desire, no longer seeking pleasure, no longer pursuing goals, no longer affirming your separate existence. Gradually extinguishing the fire of wanting that keeps the cycle of suffering turning. Schopenhauer found examples in Christian mystics who practiced extreme asceticism, in Buddhist monks who meditated for hours daily attempting to eliminate attachment, in Hindu renunciates who withdrew from world completely. These weren't escaping responsibility or indulging in spiritual selfishness. They were attempting the most difficult thing possible: complete transformation of consciousness from affirming to denying existence. Most people can't do this, and Schopenhauer admitted it frankly. Most will continue suffering because they can't stop wanting. But for the few capable of it, this path offers the only genuine escape from the prison of existence. Critics point out the contradiction. If existence is only suffering and should be denied, why does Schopenhauer continue existing? Why write books, maintain daily routines, care about his reputation? His actions contradict his philosophy, suggesting he hasn't achieved the denial he recommends. Schopenhauer would admit this. He never claimed to have reached the goal, only to have seen it. He continued existing because the will remained strong in him, because intellectual work provided temporary escape through aesthetic contemplation, because old habits and residual desires kept him engaged with life despite understanding its futility. This honesty makes his philosophy more rather than less compelling. He's not claiming enlightened detachment from a position of achieved transcendence. He's describing the human predicament from inside it, admitting he remains trapped while seeing the theoretical possibility of escape. The question remains, is his solution viable? Can denying the will actually work? Or does this very effort become another form of the will operating, the will willing its own negation, which is still willing? Buddhism addresses this by insisting that even the desire for enlightenment must eventually be released. You can't escape suffering by wanting to escape suffering. You can only let go completely, including letting go of the project of letting go. Whether anyone has actually achieved this, whether such achievement is possible for beings constituted as we are, remains uncertain. Schopenhauer offers the map, but admits he hasn't completed the journey. Dwelling in the question. Heidegger's later response to nihilism was perhaps the strangest of all. He didn't offer a solution. He didn't prescribe how to live or what values to create. He simply continued thinking, exploring the question of being with increasing subtlety while acknowledging that answers might not come. This wasn't giving up. It was recognizing that some questions must be lived rather than solved. The question, what is being, isn't a puzzle requiring a solution but an opening, a space where thinking can occur, where wonder at existence itself can be cultivated and maintained. He developed the idea of Gelassenheit, releasement, a stance toward existence that neither actively controls nor passively submits, but allows things to be what they are. This is not apathy, but a particular kind of attention, an openness to how things show themselves, rather than imposing our categories and purposes onto them. Modern thinking, Heidegger argued, is characterized by calculative thinking, reducing everything to problems to be solved, resources to be managed, information to be processed. This kind of thinking has given us enormous technical power, but has closed us off from meditative thinking, the patient, receptive attention to what is. Meditative thinking doesn't seek utility. It doesn't ask what something is for. It simply dwells with things, lets them reveal themselves, remains open to dimensions of meaning that calculative thinking misses. This sounds mystical, and Heidegger was accused of abandoning philosophy for poetry. But he insisted this was philosophy's highest calling, not building systems or solving problems, but keeping the question of being alive, preventing it from being forgotten again, as it had been for centuries. In practical terms, this means resisting technology's totalizing framework without simply rejecting it. We need technology to live in the modern world. We can't simply return to pre-modern existence. But we can develop a different relationship to it, using technical devices while not letting the technological worldview become our only way of encountering reality. Heidegger proposed moments of gathering where authentic dwelling becomes possible. Standing in a forest and letting the forest be forest, rather than seeing it as lumber or recreational resource. Sitting with others in genuine conversation rather than exchanging information. Creating art that opens worlds rather than merely expressing subjective feelings. These activities sound modest, almost trivial given the scale of the crisis he had diagnosed. If technology has captured our entire mode of being, if being itself has withdrawn, how will occasional forest walks solve anything? Heidegger would say they don't solve anything. They simply maintain a different possibility, keep alive a way of experiencing existence that technology obscures. They're not solutions but resistances, small acts of dwelling authentically within an age characterized by homelessness. Critics found this response inadequate, even irresponsible. When confronted with meaninglessness, nihilism, technological domination, shouldn't philosophy offer something more than cultivating wonder and waiting for being to reveal itself differently? But Heidegger came to believe that the attempt to master the crisis through human action was itself part of the problem, another expression of the technological will to control. True response requires not doing but thinking, not building new systems but remaining open to what might emerge. Whether this constitutes wisdom or evasion depends on how seriously you take his diagnosis of modernity's condition. If he's right that we're trapped in a framework we can't think our way out of through individual effort, then perhaps the only authentic response is precisely this: patient thinking, careful attention, and openness to possibilities we can't yet imagine. The weight of freedom. All three thinkers agree on one fundamental point. We live in a world that provides no inherent meaning, no cosmic purpose, no guarantee that our lives matter. The universe is indifferent to human values. Existence continues whether we find it meaningful or not, but their responses diverge completely. Schopenhauer says, yes, this is horror, and the appropriate response is withdrawal, denial of the will, gradual extinction of desire. Nietzsche says, yes, this is liberation, and the appropriate response is affirmation, creation of new values, living so intensely that you would choose this life eternally. Heidegger says, yes, this is the question we must dwell within, neither fleeing into comfortable illusions nor presuming we can resolve it through individual will. Which is correct? Perhaps the question itself is wrong. Perhaps these aren't competing solutions to the same problem but different ways of being human in a meaningless universe, each valid for certain temperaments, certain lives, certain moments. Schopenhauer's path suits those who have experienced suffering so intensely that existence itself appears as burden, who seek not transformation but release, not enhancement but cessation. His philosophy offers permission to stop striving, to recognize that the race has no finish line, to step out of the competition and seek peace in denial. Nietzsche's path suits those who possess what he called the tragic disposition, able to look directly at suffering and meaninglessness while still affirming life, who find joy in struggle itself, who need challenge and growth more than they need security and peace. His philosophy offers permission to be dangerous, to risk everything, to create boldly, without guarantee of success. Heidegger's path suits those who can tolerate uncertainty, who find meaning in the questioning itself, rather than in answers, who can dwell in the tension between technical mastery and meditative openness. His philosophy offers permission to wait, to think, to resist the demand for immediate solutions to questions that might require generations to unfold. The problem we inherit from all three is this: they've shown us what we've lost, the collapse of traditional meaning structures, the withdrawal of cosmic guarantee, but they haven't successfully shown us how to build something stable in its place. Their solutions remain incomplete, gestures toward possibilities rather than proven paths. This is why nihilism remains the defining challenge of modern existence. We can't return to pre-modern faith. We can't pretend God still lives, or that traditional values still carry cosmic authority. We must somehow create meaning in full awareness that we're creating it. Live by values we've chosen, while knowing we could have chosen differently. Find purpose in existence that we know is temporary and groundless. The weight of this freedom is enormous. It explains why so many people flee into distractions, lose themselves in work or entertainment or consumption, anything to avoid confronting the question, if nothing matters inherently, what will I choose to matter? Living without answers. So where does this leave us? Sitting with these three philosophers, having followed them into the depths of meaninglessness, what have we learned that we can actually use? First, that nihilism is not something to be defeated, but something to be faced. The temptation is to find a new absolute, whether religious fundamentalism or political ideology or scientific materialism, something that will tell us what life means and what we should do. But any such absolute is just another comforting lie, another way of avoiding the real situation. We live in a universe that doesn't care about us, where our values are our own creations, where everything we do will eventually be forgotten. This isn't pessimism, it's the baseline of reality. Starting from anywhere else is starting from delusion. Second, that acknowledging meaninglessness doesn't require despair. This is where Nietzsche remains valuable despite his ultimate collapse. He demonstrated that it's possible to face the void and laugh, to create meaning through sheer intensity of living, to find joy precisely in the absence of cosmic guarantee. The question isn't whether life has inherent meaning, it doesn't. The question is whether you can generate meaning through your engagement with existence, whether you can live in a way that feels worthwhile to you regardless of external validation. Third, that suffering is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be understood. Schopenhauer's brutal honesty about the prevalence of suffering, about the impossibility of lasting satisfaction, about the futility of most human striving, this remains valuable even if we reject his conclusion that existence should be denied. Suffering is built into conscious existence. Desire means lack. Attachment means vulnerability to loss. Being alive means being able to be hurt. No amount of positive thinking or self-help optimism changes this fundamental fact. The question is what we do with this knowledge. Fourth, that meaning emerges from engagement, not from abstract reasoning. Heidegger showed that we don't first figure out what life means, and then start living according to that meaning. We're always already embedded in a world of practices and relationships. Meaning emerges from authentic participation in existence, from taking up possibilities that resonate with who we are. This doesn't require grand gestures or world-changing achievement. It requires finding ways of being that feel genuine rather than performed, that express your actual values rather than inherited scripts, that connect you to something beyond momentary pleasure. Fifth, that we're social beings even in our isolation. All three philosophers struggled with loneliness. With the isolation of thinking thoughts, most people don't want to think. But none of them succeeded in creating meaning entirely alone. They needed readers, students, conversation partners, even if those relationships were difficult or distant. The meaning we create isn't purely individual. It exists in dialogue with others, in shared practices and collective projects, in the cultural conversation we inherit and contribute to. Total individualism is as false as complete conformity. We're always negotiating between personal authenticity and social participation. The darkest path forward. Nihilism declares that nothing matters. But notice what happens when you take this seriously. When you really try to live as if nothing matters. You can't do it. You continue caring about things. Your breakfast tastes good or bad. Your friend's suffering affects you. Beauty still moves you. Cruelty still offends you. These responses aren't logical conclusions from accepted premises. They're not beliefs you could justify if challenged. They're simply how you find yourself constituted. The fact of your existence as this particular being with these particular sensitivities and concerns. This is the strange discovery waiting at the end of nihilism's darkest path. Caring is not a choice you make after determining what's objectively valuable. Caring is what you already do, the basic structure of being a conscious entity in a world. Nihilism is right that the universe doesn't validate your concerns. Wrong that this makes your concerns invalid. Your concerns are valid precisely because they're yours, because you're the being who has them, because this is how existence feels from the inside of your particular life. The task is not to find meaning that justifies caring, but to own the caring you already do, to take responsibility for it, to shape your life around what genuinely matters to you, rather than what you think should matter, or what others say should matter. This is harder than following a prescribed path. Religion tells you what to care about: God, salvation, moral law, spiritual development. Society tells you what to care about: success, family, possessions, reputation. Nihilism tears away these prescriptions and leaves you facing the question, what do I actually care about? What would I care about if no one were watching? If there were no reward, if it earned me nothing? Some people discover they care about creating art, music, writing, building things that didn't exist before. Some discover they care about understanding, pursuing knowledge, solving problems, figuring out how things work. Some discover they care about connection, relationships, community, contributing to something larger than themselves. Some discover they care about experience, beauty, adventure, sensation, fully inhabiting the present moment. None of these is objectively better than the others. None carries cosmic validation. They're simply different ways of being human, different patterns that consciousness falls into when allowed to express its own nature rather than conforming to external demands. The darkest path forward is accepting that this is enough. Not trying to find something more fundamental. Not seeking metaphysical justification. Not waiting for cosmic approval. Simply living from your actual concerns while acknowledging they're not objectively grounded, finding meaning in engagement while knowing the universe doesn't care about your meaning. This is what lies beyond nihilism. Not a return to certainty, but a different relationship to uncertainty. Not new foundations, but the courage to build without foundations. Not victory over meaninglessness, but creative participation in the ongoing construction of meaning. Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and Heidegger walked different paths into the darkness. Each discovered something true about human existence in a godless universe. Each tried to map a way through that others could follow. Each ultimately left the question unresolved because perhaps it can't be resolved, only lived. We inherit their question, how do we live well in a world that provides no guarantee that living well matters? They offer no final answer, but they've shown us the territory, marked the dangerous passages, warned us about the pitfalls and false shortcuts. The rest is up to us. Each generation must walk this path again, must face the void again, must create meaning again. The darkness remains, but so does the possibility of light, not light that illuminates eternal truths, but light we generate through living courageously, thinking honestly, caring deeply despite the lack of cosmic permission. This is nihilism's gift. Not comfort but clarity, not answers but authentic questions, not meaning but the freedom and responsibility to create meaning. The path is dark, but it's ours to walk.